Hi. I've actually scripted this. I'm Mira Shore.
I'm Susan B.
Our roundtable is about a community of meaning, the editorial project that we founded in 1986. This is not going to be a panel, it's a roundtable discussion, even though we're all plunked in a line. But we hope it'll be more like a guided conversation. We've
Just to match Mira's.
Yes. We just have a few images right at the front to quickly introduce the basics of what we did before we get to the conversation. What you see up there is the first issue. We published our first issue in December 1986. We were a small journal. Our first issue print run was 500. The biggest print run was 1,000. We had a modest subscription base and sold also through distributors. We did everything ourselves and had no staff. The journal had no ads and there were no reproductions except in the last issue.
And no interns.
And no interns. Paid or unpaid. Now let's see if I can, oh yes. We published, after the first issue, starting in '87, we published 2 issues a year for 10 years. The PDF scans of all of the issues are now archived on jacket2.org. Each issue had a different color. You can hold up our.
Now I get to hold up my.
Yes, and so people looked forward to what color it would be.
This was the only color you got in the issue.
Yes.
Was the cover.
Yes, it was the only visual pleasure. Our last double issue, 19 and 20, was in 1996, was all visual to make up for that. In 2000, we published an anthology of meaning for Duke University Press, which is still in print with a beautiful cover of a detail of a painting by Joan Snyder. And the archive of meaning is in the Beinecke Rare Book Collection at Yale University. And in 2002, we began Meaning Online, first sort of hooked up to another website, kind of magazine, but later on our own through UPenn. And where we've continued our forums, which were an important part of our mission to give visual artists a voice in critical discourse on issues of importance to them. Meaning included forums where we would develop the questions at any given moment. We'd invite artists, critics, historians, theorists, and poets to respond, publishing the results in the forum starting in '87 with a forum on authenticity and meaning, and continuing with forums on racism, on motherhood and art, on creativity and community, on making art over time, and on working conditions for younger artists. On the online issues, as you can see, we published collections of entries on the topics of resistance to the mainstream art world, on collaboration, on feminism, and for our 25th anniversary issue in 2011, on public traumas, income inequality, digital corporate conglomerates, and the nature of privacy for the artist or critic working in the age of social networking and global spectacle.
So all of our panelists have contributed to issues of meaning and Meaning Online, so I'm going to introduce them. We're deciding that we don't need any introduction. But to my left is Joyce Kozlov, who's an artist who lives in New York. She will have 2 solo shows here this winter. Social Studies at the French Institute Alliance Française from February 24th to April 25th, and Maps and Patterns at D.C. Moore Gallery in Chelsea from March 26th to April 25th. Then to her left is Sheila Pepe, who's since the mid-1990s has used feminist and craft traditions to investigate received notions concerning the production of canonical artwork, as well as the artist's relationship to museum display and the art institution. Pepe's Put Me Down Gently 2014, commissioned by the ICA Boston, is currently installed at the Wexner Center as part of Fiber to Sculpture 1960 to the present. In June, she'll be artist in residence in Mexico City. To her left is Alexandria Smith, an artist who earned an MA in art education from NYU and an MFA in painting and drawing from Parsons, the New School for Design. She's the recipient of numerous awards and residencies, including the Fountainhead Residency, a Fine Arts Work Center fellowship in Provincetown, and an AIR Gallery fellowship, which I'm particularly proud of since I'm a long-term member of AIR. She'll have a solo show at AIR in Brooklyn, in Dumbo, which opens June 4th. And to her left, who I can barely see, is Cara Rooney, who's a Brooklyn-based artist and critic working in performance, sculpture, and new media installation. She's the managing art editor for the Brooklyn Rail and faculty member at the School of Visual Arts. She'll have a two-person exhibition curated by Charlotta Kotek, upcoming this fall at 5 Miles Gallery in Brooklyn. We'll start with some questions we prepared for our panelists, and then they have prepared some surprise questions for us. So we have no idea how this will all unfold, but it's not a panel, it is a round table. So please don't wait for the papers. So I'm going to start with Joyce. You were part of the original Heresies Collective and were involved in the publication of some landmark first issues. What were the high points about the experience and the publications you worked on? And what were the difficulties, and why did you burn out?
Okay, I just want to kind of wing it. In 1975, which is 40 years ago, some of us were talking about the fact that we had feminist galleries and exhibitions, and there were magazines about women's art, like the Feminist Art Journal, Women Artists News, Newsletter, and Chrysalis was emerging around that time in Los Angeles. But we wanted to create a magazine not about women artists, but about the issues that women artists were passionate about. So we informally gathered together, and by the time our group was finalized, there were 21 of us. And I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but I don't know if everybody in the audience knows about heresies. And we created the world's most inefficient structure for making a magazine, which was based on the fact that we were all anarchists, basically, and we were artists, architect, anthropologist, art historian, and so we thought about everything. And we never brought out it was a quarterly, we never brought out 4 issues a year. Each issue was edited and designed by a different group of women who came forward with a passion for that particular subject. And I only worked on one issue, I burned out, and so did just about everybody. But it was incredibly intense, and I brought this because I think this illustrates my point. My mother died recently. I'm cleaning out her house, and I found this. I do not own one of these, but we wanted to make a poster to raise money, and we couldn't agree on anything because we were all artists. So somebody said, let's make a fan and put all our images on it. And this was the least commercially successful poster in the history of womankind. But that's the Heresies fan. But what did you ask me?
Well, here,
And I want to say one more thing. This is a museum of design. We are all sitting on chairs that have no backs.
Joyce, I love that fan. I think that one of the things that, when Susan and I started, Heresies was a very important model to us, but it was also a counter model in that we knew that the Heresies Collective, publication collective, everything had to be agreed by everybody. So to achieve a consensus could be very stressful, and we knew also that it took longer. So we chose the model of a small group. But I wondered whether you could talk a little bit, let's say, just about the experience of the issue that you worked on, the one that quickly burned you out.
Well, each issue took about a year to do because it was a different group working on it. And so we would reach out for entries, and then we'd each read them, and then we'd debate them. And then we'd send it back to the writer or the artist to redo it, and then it would come back, and we'd all read it again, and then we'd debate it. And this would go on and on. And the issues are terrific, but, I worked on an issue called Women's Traditional Arts. And that was supposed to celebrate the creativity of women in different cultures and the art forms that we made. Well, in exploring that subject, and we worked with a lot of anthropologists, in many cultures, this was a form of oppression, like little girls going blind making lace, for instance. So you couldn't just celebrate it. So it became women's traditional arts, the politics of aesthetics, our issue.
Move on to.
Oh, okay. So we now have a question for
All right,
Sheila, which
I'm the-
Mira's supposed to be
And
asking.
this is the ultimate in collaboration, and since we have only one mic that's functioning.
The mics work.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
working? Is this one working now? Yay! Okay. So Sheila's our wild card because we had a sort of pre-meeting where we were trying not to actually have the great discussion that would then not happen here. So, but Sheila wasn't there, so she's our secret wild card. But Sheila,
Yes.
could you speak to what you feel are important feminist issues today, as opposed to in the 80s and 90s, from your experience of these different periods?
It's funny because if you had asked me 3 months ago, I would have given you an exactly different, completely different answer. But I'm feeling a tremendous amount of backlash, especially in areas where many proclaim to be feminists. So there's a kind of like a return to, for me, a return to even essentialism would be interesting right now, with all the kind of jargony, kind of disconnect between spin language and meaning.
Can you be more specific about some of the examples that
Yeah,
you're
so-
looking at?
Yeah, move the mic closer.
Okay, so I won't look at you when I answer. How's that? Yeah, I'm finding in communities of otherness, in the queer community, for example, I'm like, oh God, let's bring the hardcore lesbian feminists back. Thank you, ridiculous. That means of our desire for fixity with the loss of meaning. For example, the kind of chaos you're talking about right now is very intolerable. We have a lot of jargony names, but not a lot of stand-in for experience. So the kind of tolerance for messy stuff that comes from the early years of feminists trying to infiltrate and be a part of the center, coming from the fringe, those tactics seem to be very important again.
Do you think that the margins have in a way been further colonized by the center? So even if you're at the margin, you're still thinking more in a sort of...
Well, no one is not thinking about the center.
Yeah.
And so there are these really interesting and sometimes canny ways that either is, I'll just say it, performed by men or performed by canonical thinkers, let's just say it, where there's a real capitalization of the margin in order to colonize whatever's kind of happening. So, feminism ends up, I feel like if I have privilege in some location, my feminism becomes more important to kind of as a giveaway.
What would your answer have been 3 months ago?
Well, let's be more patient. It's going to take 50 to 100 years.
Okay, should we move?
Yes.
Alex, as a sort of a younger artist, to categorize it that way, I was curious how you look for community and do you participate in any kind of community-oriented collaborative projects? Have you done it in the past? Are you interested in that?
I guess social media has helped a lot with that, with expanding the networking possibilities, residency opportunities, and, colleagues from grad school have contributed to the community and added to it. I guess I am interested in collaborating, but I have yet to do so artistically. I think most recently I collaborated on an online publication with the Winter Tangerine Review. They did an issue called Hands Up, Don't Shoot, as a call in response to the non-indictments that have been happening and the injustices that have been happening. So in those ways, I have collaborated with writers, but not yet in art making way. So I think being able to having easier access to colleagues through social media, through Facebook, Instagram, has really helped to contribute and expand upon those opportunities to collaborate, whether it's, via dialogue and conversations, critiques, or just simply meeting up and getting together and having conversations in person. That's been a huge help.
So social media do create a sense of community for you, would you say that?
In a strange way.
Yeah,
Because, you have all these friends on Facebook that you've never met possibly, but then there are also people that you have met and interacted with that allow you to kind of make time to talk and have discussions, whether, through iMessage and things like that. So in those ways, it has created community.
But
Yeah.
you feel that helps you in some way just to be as an artist.
Yeah, I think so. In some ways it does help, but it also helps you to feel more isolated in other ways too.
How so?
It's, I guess, how do I articulate this? I guess it's because you don't feel that human connection as much because you're behind a screen, but yet you also, through postings and updates, feel, a sense of like companionship and camaraderie because other people are experiencing the same woes or highs that you're experiencing.
I think what's interesting to me, coming from our first publication, which was all pre-digital, pre-computer even, which is hard to believe at this point, is that we didn't have, the community that we had around meaning was actually the people that we wrote to, called, saw, and there was no online community. So it was a totally different experience of what a community was. And so now moving into the online digital era as a publication makes it feel really different. I mean, I think when we did the hard copies, when you had to actually get the copy and we actually had to meet and we had parties, but they were, it just felt very different. And I think you're making a really interesting point about how communities changed. And it's good and it's bad because I think the digital community expands, who you know. Like I feel like I have, 2,000 friends on Facebook, but I don't really know who they are. And, they wish me happy birthday, but I'm not sure who they are. And it's like very weird. Like I got all these birthday greetings and 100 people, I had no idea exactly why they were wishing me happy birthday. So, this is a point that you're making, and I think for younger people who've only been involved with the digital community, marketplace, whatever it is, it's a whole different experience.
Yeah.
And Mira and I have dragged ourselves, kicking and screaming, me more than her, into this current situation. She loves Facebook.
Yeah. me more than you. Right, what you're saying. Yes, no, I know. I kind of I love the idea of just being plugged into this, large, amorphous community. Although when people come up to me and say, "Hi, I'm your Facebook friend," then that little picture and the human being kind of. But I have to say that I did the. At the very beginning of the magazine, Susan said, "Well, you'll do the fulfillments." I'd never done anything with a magazine. Susan had. So I didn't know what fulfillments were, but it meant that I kept the mailing list. I actually physically mailed together. We'd schlep the magazines to the post office. But I had a little red index card box, remember index cards, and which had all the subscribers, and I would kind of update it. And I didn't know everybody on that. I mean, there were only about 400 names at the max, I think, but to me, that was a virtual community. It was very meaningful, that group of people. It had an intimacy to it, and then it had a kind of unknown. And then we were told that for every printed issue, you could count on 4 readers, that was sort of the established formula. So then I had this sense of this beyond that community. Susan, you want to ask?
Oh, right. So this ties into our next question, which is for Kara. And since you work on the Brooklyn Rail, which I hope a lot of people here read, and also is an online and hard copy publication, and you're involved with editing the critics page, can you talk about the collaborative nature of those forums and the editorial process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the strengths of the Rail is just to circle back to this idea of community is really about the collection of voices that.
Can't hear?
Better? Okay. I was just saying, I think one of the wonderful things about the Rail, just to circle back to that idea of community, is that it's really based on the premise that there are going to be different voices every month that contribute to the publication. So while we have long-standing writers who have been with us for the 15 years since the publication was founded, we also have a lot of new writers and new voices that are constantly contributing to the magazine. And that, for me as an editor and also as a contributor, has been really exciting to see develop over the past 5 years that I've been with the paper. In terms of the forums, I was the September guest editor of last year, and we focused on the issue of gender inequality in the art world. And so my vision for the project was to invite a number of contributors from the visual arts, from academia, to weigh in on this idea. And what it ended up very much being was a feminist-oriented publication of about 25 to 30 voices. And the really wonderful thing about it is that I set it up so that it would be an intergenerational conversation. So we had artists and writers who were as young as 24 years old contributing, and we had artists like Suzanne Lacey, who is in her 80s, also contributing.
No, she's Suzanne will die if you said she's in her 80s.
Suzanne, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I misspoke. That's being on stage. My apologies.
60s.
Suzanne, my apologies if she's watching. What I meant to say is that we had this very wide range of voices contributing to the publication who had seen the many different waves of feminism come and go, relate to one another. And what that prompted was an interesting back and forth in terms of referencing ideas like, Sheila, you had mentioned about backlash and the infighting that had taken place within feminist circles, what even the idea of fourth wave feminism looks like. And for me as an editor, it was wonderful to have access to these pieces and to these voices that, if it wasn't for this model, would have never been able to land anywhere specifically. And I think for our readership, that really opened up the possibility of something very different than what the Rail had even dealt with before, and that any major publication really hadn't focused on.
Well, when we started our publication a year after the Guerrilla Girls, another model for us in some sense, the key word was intervention. That was sort of the buzzword, that you intervened into a political situation, or a socio-political situation, aesthetic political situation. So I think that that particular forum, in a way, was an intervention into the culture of the Rail, it seemed like, as well as
an intervention into a particular moment where these issues are again sort of hot. Did you? I mean, how did that
Absolutely,
work?
absolutely. You know, one of the great things about the guest critic opportunity is that there is no censorship in terms of the topic that we want to work with. And so for myself as a visual artist as well, I had been involved in many different exhibitions, interventionist events throughout the year that were feminist-based, and I started to ask myself, why was this becoming a hot-button topic again all of a sudden, right? It's not that it ever disappears, but it weaves in and out of public consciousness. And so this, for me, was an opportunity to address that, both for myself and for the readership of The Rail, which I don't know if they had ever really... You know, it's impossible for us to really know what the readers were looking for or if they were missing that sort of dialogue. And so this was an opportunity to interject that in a way that I found really interesting.
And I guess I'd like to say, as a feminist publication, I mean, we were an odd feminist publication coming out of the heresies and consciousness raising of the 70s, but what distinguished our editorship was that we included men. And that at that time was considered extremely unusual for a feminist publication, self-declared feminist publication, to also publish men. And I felt that it was very important that we could have a cross readership, which is, I think, what characterizes The Rail also, is that you get a broader, it's not just a small community of people reading it. And we really felt that by including different voices, especially through the forums, and also using different topics, there was a way to expand our network of people that would, hear what we had to say. And I think that put us in a slightly different position as a feminist publication from the ones that we had come out of and that we looked to. I mean, I very much admired, I worked at Women Artists News, and I admired heresies, but I wanted to do something really different.
So just to add on that, before then, Sheila, actually we were not a feminist publication, and we were we were feminist, and we published feminist subjects and themes, but we were a journal of contemporary art issues. So we were intervening on a larger field, but coming with a feminist politics. As well as interest in specific subjects. So that was another, we were playing two roles in a way.
So the perfect segue to the comments. The distinction that you were two women who were feminists writing and working from that subject position and then including more people became the strategy for taking your various identities to whatever location you were working into the world, right, in the mainstream. So pushing back on the marginalized location. Other things happen, and I think simultaneously there was, from different perspectives, your writing, for me it was just a realization, and Mira and I met around My Mother's an Artist thing, realizing that suddenly we really needed intergenerational conversations. And whether we do that teaching or in other ways, that was very important. But I just want to go in this direction now and say, one of the things that happens through the use of digital everything is that the balkanization of communities, where it's much, even if it looks like you're having a diverse analog relationship with many different people, all of the tools of the internet simply reflect your preferences back to you. So you are constantly believing that you are in the center of a really diverse world but they have these very discrete limits, right? So the balkanization is why I would be now primed to be very sensitive to certain things, like in the queer community, for example, personally. That balkanization also creates this situation where, as a feminist, I might get very involved in issues of race 1 week, and the next week when everybody's picture goes from black to what they looked like before, on Facebook. I'm like, okay, that's over. Like the speed of it and the idea of sustaining work, licking labels, keeping cards, that kind of sustainedness seems to be difficult to.
Well, Joyce mentioned that heresies, an issue might end up taking a year to pull together.
It's unthinkable
Or more,
today.
yeah. And ours took 6 months. And, you know, I would write an essay that would take me a year to compose. And now, if you're on a news cycle of 24 hours, and it's very hard to break out of that cycle to think beyond a certain moment, so that you have an idea, and yes, you will dedicate a year to doing it. Of course, unpaid and without any, anything to support you. So those things have changed discourse for sure. Maybe we can switch to the other part where we're hoping to get questions from you guys, and then hopefully there'll be a moment for open discussion.
We'll fix this for the next panel. Well, I wanted to go back to your question, Mira, about whether the project that I did was interventionist within the rail, because I know you've spoken about your first publication of Meaning as being an interventionist response to what was happening politically and culturally at the time, this moment of transformation. And do you feel that in some ways, we've come back full circle, and that we're again in this moment where that calls for an interventionist response of a very specific nature? And if so, what would you envision that to be?
I don't know. I saw the show at the Gray Art Gallery of political prints from the 20s and 30s, and there's in the catalog there's a statement by John Reed, and it begins almost like Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I mean, everything he describes is still present now. So in a sense, we're always in a state of needing an intervention, And I think, my text for your piece had to do with amnesiac return in the sense that, I wrote a piece and then I realized, I gave it a title and then I realized I'd already written a piece with exactly that title. So I had to duplicate it, which had to do with feminism. But I think for me, a large part of our initial reason for being came actually not only because of the backlash against feminism, which was developing at that moment, and like Susan Faludi's book is about that moment, really, but it was about major changes in the art world, which were both a double whammy, which seemed unrelated but was in some way related, between what in a sense was the second great art market boom. So there was the one in the 60s, then there was the one in the early 80s. So suddenly this incredible commodification and, all male young artists who I'd gone to school with who were all, part of that. And then on the other hand, the importance of a magazine like October and the influx suddenly of a completely transformed language of art, which also was leaving painting in the dust and leaving, since it was a moment of, postmodernist deconstruction of any kind of stable meaning. That's how we came to the title Meaning. And then the slashes were to kind of cut into that, but that was really to me, that was the important intervention. And of course we were feminist, and that was a part of what was being erased.
And the other aspect of our collaboration was that we were also, our parents were friends from childhood. We had a lot of connections that went way back, but we were also both painters, and at the time, women who were painters were like the bottom. That was like you couldn't be anything worse at that very moment. So we just felt like if we didn't take over the discourse and just like insert ourselves in the discourse, we were just going to disappear entirely. And so it was kind of like what they call a DIY thing, like I see the woman who actually helped us out with the first issue, found us a computer, we pasted it up by hand, we schlepped it to them, we did everything by hand and very, very slowly. And the slowness, I think, actually was very meaningful. And because the slowness just enabled us to actually talk to each other, talk to our authors, spend time editing. it really was creating a community. And then there were certain issues that were very, I would say, controversial, or the motherhood issue, which was the subject of a whole day of panels last year, which I couldn't get to in Chicago, where we found out that certain women artists were mothers, and they were very shocked that we actually uncovered this fact about them and wanted to talk about it. So there were these things that, for our racism issue, we sent out 150 letters to people asking for, we would ask a series of questions. And we got very few responses. We got like 15 responses, and we published everything. The other thing about the forums, which was novel at the time, was that we didn't censor anything. Like whatever came in, it got published. Not in the essays, where we did reject a lot of stuff. But in the forums, we really did publish what people sent us. So, but it came in the mail, so they had to have time to think about it.
Yeah. So I guess my question's a little broader. I was curious to know how how your definition of feminism has changed since the beginning of Meaning to now.
My definition of feminism has never changed, and it probably casts back to the 19th century, which is it's a gendered critique of power. It comes, unpopularly at this point, from the experience of living inside a female body, and that was my agenda when I was like 23, was to bring into high art in as intact a form as possible what it felt like to live inside a female body with a mind. That was my own personal agenda. So that expanded into what meaning was, and then what, in a sense, that continues to be my basic understanding of feminism at a moment where feminism is so changed that when people ask me about feminism, sometimes I feel like saying it actually doesn't exist anymore according to my 19th century suffragette definition, or my Virginia Woolf definition of what feminism is. I mean, I would say that it's an extinct category, except it isn't, because it's so important.
I mean, I think the fact that we're still here having this day of feminist collaboration shows that feminism is still alive, and I still believe in it as a member of AIR, which is an all-women's group, and in my own personal life, and that's where it plays out at this point. I'm also very interested in framing the conversation to be more inclusive, and I think that feminism has expanded a lot since the 70s. Since a sort of narrow framework. And I feel if it gets more inclusive, it's better for everybody, So if that answers your question.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. Very close. So I'm listening to this description of meaning with all the slash marks, in October, and the kind of language that was roiling around those years and the reception. And so can you say a little bit about how you used language and thought about language in the writing when the publication first began, and how you might think about it now, and has that changed?
Well, I think one thing that was happening was that I was coming out of a poetic context, because I'd worked on a magazine called Language, actually. So I was involved with a lot of poets. And what I wanted for our magazine was that we didn't have a language of just dry theory and criticism. We wanted to include different voices and let somebody like Carol A. Schneeman write a manifesto for us, let artists write poems, let artists' voices be heard. So for us, it was really a magazine that, as opposed to the glossy art magazines, first of all, we had no pictures, so there was nothing to look at. So if you wanted to look at the magazine, all you got was text. So you either read it or you didn't. You couldn't just opt out for the pictures. And so text was really important to us, but I wanted to have different voices, and I didn't want to have this kind of ad copy, which is unfortunately, I hope I'm not insulting anybody, but a lot of art magazines is basically ad copy, and we didn't want that. We wanted to have diverse voices, and when I say diverse voices, I don't mean like who was writing, I mean how they were writing. So we allowed people to write poetry. You know, we got strange things from Richard Tuttle. We got, you know, all these voices from people who don't write standard English. And also we allowed people to interview, I see Aviva's here, who interviewed Allison Knowles and Carol A. Schneeman, and we had interviews, articles about Nancy Spiro. We had one of the first articles about Kusama. So we also had, you know, essays about what we thought were important issues and people. And some of those people have become very famous, which is very nice, but they weren't famous when we, also some of our writers, who actually, like Barbara Pollock, we gave them a forum to write their first things, and they actually went on to be writers. They actually stopped doing their art and became writers. So, and the same with Mira, who became more of a larger figure.
Well, I did write a lot for the magazine, and it did give me a dual identity. I'm sorry, I don't think it. I mean, it made me more. Gave me more of a public venue as a writer than, and because it's much easier. I mean, one of the things about doing the magazine the way that we did, and of writing in general, because it holds true today with, you know, with not only with blogs but also even with major magazines like Artforum. You're not really paid to do those things. I mean, you're paid something, but you're not. It's not a living wage. So, anyway. I felt that I was actually trying to do two things. I was trying to write so that my writing would marginally be taken seriously by the October people. And I say that marginally because the silence was deafening from the other side and remains so to this day. It's as if it never happened. But on the other hand, you know, to write accessible language, my heroes and heroines were John Berger, Lucy Lippard, Lyndon Auckland, Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte, you know, as those people that I was looking to. So I was trying to learn theory language enough, and it was interesting. It was a struggle. You can actually see the struggle in, you know, I write. You can see me struggling with it, and then I think so. To get to the more current moment, I was really excited by our 25th anniversary issue online, because I think it was much more experimental. I mean, the nature of what people wrote in their style and in their approach and how they approached it was looser. So there's less of a super ego coming from that, you know, influence of /October /theory, et cetera, even though it's still a prominent part of academia. And I think that's very much in keeping with some of the critics' pages that have been, you know, in the Rail. And for me, my writing in the Rail has been really fun because I've done even more experimental writing than any place else, because I've been in more than one. You know, it's been nice.
Yes, you have.
So, but I've enjoyed because it is moving so fast. You know, you get a call, you've got a week. Or 10 days. Here's a subject, 800 words. You know, it's like. So you just go for it in a way that's very different than if you have, you know, a year to think about an essay.
Right. Yeah, and you know, I just wanted to speak to that because the section that I put together was one of the more robust critics pages we've done, and I was given 3 weeks to turn around content. So it was the middle of the summer. I got a call from Fong Bui, said, "Do you want to do this?" And for a second, while I was holding my breath, I said, "Sure." And I didn't really know how many people were going to be able to contribute, but I thought, you know what, we'll give it a shot and see what happens. And I was just so amazed at the outpouring of really thoughtful pieces that came from that prompt. And I think they would have been very different had everybody had 3 months to think about what they were going to write. So in a sense, you know, I hear what you're saying, Susan, about the time and how wonderful it was to have that and to be able to put that into this collective effort. But I also think there's something to be said for having to respond in the moment, and that there's a freshness to that type of writing that is hard to emulate or repeat when you really have time to go back and revise and rethink your thoughts.
Yeah, it's not only for you two, it could be for someone or someone's in the audience who are thinking about or beginning to start a project like this. You can't hear me? Can you hear me? Because each generation reinvents the wheel, and hopefully, and you got to take them by surprise. You got to analyze the moment, and out of that moment, find the form, which we've now talked about several different eras. So this is a very mature audience, and I include myself in that. And I'm wondering about the next even form. Well, will it be a journal? Will it be online? What will it be? And how will these issues be reinvigorated? Because there has been, in the last couple of years in the art world in New York, a lot of very confrontational discussions about feminism again. After it's just like a new cycle of that, a new wave of that. And how is it going to be addressed in a new way? That's what I'm wondering about. And I just wanted to plug this film called The Heretics, which was made by Joan Bratterman, a filmmaker who was an original member of the collective. And you can get it online, and it's really, she did it at the right moment because we're all still alive, and who knows how much longer. There's another member of the original collective in the front row, Elka Solomon, who was on the mailing committee with me. But I'm sorry, that was a serious question, even though I sort of moved away from it, about what is the next form for
Well, I think
serious discussion about these issues.
I think one of the reasons that this group, who I'm of course very grateful to, put this, we only have 5 minutes. Okay, so the reason that they put this day of collaborations together was just to address this very question, like where are we going in the future of feminism, and how can we use collaboration creatively to bring us forward. And so by looking backwards and looking forwards, we're really interested in that, how things are going to develop. But I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. Yes?
Wait for the microphone so that, which
Is there a
will,
microphone?
there's the one we're using, right? Oh, no, there's that one there.
Where was the hand? Okay.
We have plenty.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being up there. It's really exciting to see you and to be in this room. I have a question for Sheila and Susan and Mira pertaining more to the definitions of feminism that you're discussing. And I'm a self-identified neo-essentialist wrestling with what it means to bring back ideas of essentialist feminism now. But I also consider myself a trans-feminist ally and advocate. And I'm wondering, Sheila brought up Mary Daly, who is amazing but also transphobic. And Mira, you're citing kind of definitions of feminism from the 19th century and then saying how different things are now, or the evolutions as we try to consider a more inclusive feminism. Sorry, I'm really nervous. I don't know why. You're all like these incredible figureheads to me. So forgive my shaky voice. So I guess I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on essentialist feminism and on inclusivity and trans feminism and how we build community that is,
So
in fact.
I want to say about Mary Daly, as brilliant as she was also like race phobic. I mean,
Yeah.
the relationship with the lack of relationship with Audre Lorde that went on so long, even to the day of her memorial service in Boston, there was an Audre Lorde event that night. I mean, oh, so even to the day of her, did everybody hear about the Audre Lorde? She was race phobic, okay. So there's problems, right? When you look backward, there are always going to be intense kind of partial viewpoints on something that we can see completely today, right? So you pick and honor what you can, pull it forward, and you have to recreate what you have to use those tools to go forward without being purist about it. Now, one of the things that I want to say about postmodernism and feminism is that postmodernism allowed a kind of multi-gates into the table. All the language that got fractured created all these little gates for us to kind of climb in and get a seat at the table. And then what happened? Things got very purist. And that is, that's like one of the greatest contributions of like messy, collective, arguing, processy feminism that's so kind of intolerable, is that I believe that we really need to learn how to do that again with each other, have very strong opinions, and have a little kind of...
Right, we live in the era of trigger points, where you
Right.
where you have to announce to a class that, Hamlet is about patricide, and if you feel upset about that, you may have to leave the room. So whereas, I mean, one of the reasons that I preferred a small collective was that I had found the intensity of a larger collective in the feminist art program at Cal Arts, who saw me up at the corner in the Woman House. It was just so intense, I could hardly bear it. And I was not into performance particularly, and but of course I was transformed by the challenges of people saying, you think you're this, but you're not this. Why aren't you this? This is a feminist. This isn't a feminist. But then I had to go back into myself and into something that was more workable from my point of view. I think the essentialism issue, which is one that is very important to me because I suffered in my career from being perceived as an essentialist, both as a writer and then by extension as a painter, unrelated to whatever I was doing. But just because I actually felt at the time, I won't even go into it. But I think it would be interesting now to revisit the theory. Like, what was essentialist theory? What was its, and what was more important, because there was no essentialist theory. There was only a critique of essentialism. It was a discourse created by antithesis. What were they saying, and then how does that accord with what's right now is held to be very important, and the latest ideas about fluidity of gender or not fluidity, so.
Maybe that's an idea for an exhibition, like the last panel. Make a show of the most essentialist art.
That could be interesting. I think the show that Amelia Jones did around the dinner party actually was a kind of essentialist show, and she got incredibly attacked in LA for doing that show. So at that time, it was deeply unpopular. And I think still now, with all the issues around transgender and gender fluidity and who's male and who's female and who's not male and female and are they or not, which I'm experiencing in my own life, it really complicates a lot of things that when we did, for instance, the motherhood issue, we didn't consider including men in the motherhood issue. But maybe now, because so many men are parents and there's a lot of queer couples that are raising children together, it would be a different thing. I mean, the motherhood issue at the time, which we did it in 1992 when I had my second child, it seemed very radical, to ask women what they thought as artists, as mothers. That was like shocking to people. But now it would be a totally different thing. If we ever had to revisit that, I wouldn't be doing a motherhood issue. I'd probably do a parenthood issue, or I'd just forget it,
So, okay, I want to really appreciate Alex's question to Mira and also intervene with some messiness. I found your comment that your definition of feminism hasn't changed actually really disturbing. And, as someone who, I identify as a feminist, I have for decades, but for many years and maybe decades, I felt pretty disaffected by the kind of feminism that, that was dominant, where I felt often I had to check my race at the door. And, my concerns about colonization and solidarity with indigenous people didn't seem to have a place in feminist discourse. So with that, I'd really love to hear from the younger folks or folks whose definition of feminism has changed.
Or was never. Take that.
I have conflicting feelings about the word feminism in general for those same reasons of feeling excluded from the conversation as a Black queer woman. And so it's shifting slowly, but it hasn't completely changed. And I don't know if I'll ever feel, I guess now at this point, it's really trying to find feminist artists, people in general that, it happens to kind of revolve around race. It's Black feminist women or Black feminist queer women. And so that's become the community that I've become a part of, and that's helped to alter my feelings and definitions about feminism towards feminism. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and so it hasn't completely changed, unfortunately, just yet. But being invited to forums like this one and panel discussions like this one starts to steer it in a different direction. So, yeah.
So, I want to make a strong call for the accumulation of language, not the correction and displacement of language, right? Like barnacles, right? We're going to add stuff so that you will throw out the term feminism and say you want to deal with it. That doesn't make any sense for me. You have to add, right? So it's I think there is some thing where you need to, if we need to change all language as an update, the definition of all language and all individuals' language as an update. So we're mostly a bunch of white women, right? Race is a problem in all white locations, including feminism.
How does that happen?
Well,
How do you change it?
how do you change? You get a lot of white people who care a whole lot about race. That's right. But here's the thing: if feminism is a social justice issue, right, then you throw your back behind all social justice issues that show up. For me, that's part of feminism.
I just want to say that I felt that feminism was the most radical political movement that could be, because it includes the 3.5 billion human beings who are born into a female body. Their decisions beyond that are implicated and have transformed the thought about feminism. It also involves the 3 billion people who are born into male bodies and who live, have children, deal with females. I think that many of the issues that were problematic, that feminism was an intervention into, beginning with, in the 1700s, basically, have not been solved. I mean, every day you read something horrible that's happening to women all around the world. So this is not only a white women's issue, it's an issue that is global. And, we're more familiar with what happens right in our backyard. So the guy in South Carolina yesterday that described women as a second-rate cut of meat, et cetera, but also, young women being sold into slavery around the world, or raped and married at age 12, et cetera, child labor, all the things that particularly have an impact on women. So there's a lot of room left for what would, under the rubric of the word feminism, which I saw as
as I said, a critique of power. And I think, if you can't use the word patriarchy, you're actually impeded at being able to critique power at a certain level. So if you have the word patriarchy, then I think you can still have the word feminism. And I think that just my last word on meaning as what we did was, I think that we were doing what Lucy Lepard talked about the other day, which is like living small, doing something small, so that we could write what we wanted, publish what we wanted, that would be a critique of the power structure in the world that we were operating under. And other people are going to have another power structure. Their intervention is going to be in a slightly different place that's specific to theirs. And I hope that every generation takes on what is important to critique in order for human beings to survive, as free people, basically.
I was in an audience of a similar panel in the 70s, and Linda Nochlin was asked for her definition of feminism, and she said justice. And I like the idea of expansiveness, inclusiveness, and openness, rather than any kind of narrow.
Yeah, I think what Sheila said when she said it has to be additive is really what I would like to see feminism evolve into. And I think we were talking about it here, into a more inclusive and larger forum. I mean, that it's not what it was, and it has to evolve, and it has to change, and it has changed. And you can't,
Yeah, of course.
we're changing along with it, hopefully. I hope that we have
As much
changed.
as we can. I mean, well, only because you're gender coded. I mean, more than half this room, I have to say, is probably over 50. No? How many people are over 50? All right, so it's about half and half. So, you'll find, those of you who are under 50, that you're coded, So you're coded, and then you transform as much as you can. And you carry over the history, and you try to adapt to the present, and then loop. It's like knitting, to go to a Sheila metaphor. You're looping the past into the present.
We're getting the wrap-up notice, and I'd like to end with Susan's "I hope."
Okay, thanks. Thank you all very much.